On today's Murder, She Wrote podcast, we find ourselves in New York again, with misplaced umbrellas, writers, publishers, and murder. Oh my. Hello, and welcome to the Murder, She Wrote podcast, where I watch every single episode of the hit 80s/90s show Murder, She Wrote, starring 3-time Academy Award nominee and 5-time Tony Award winner, Miss Angela Lansbury. Today we're going to be talking about Season 1, Episode 17, Footnote to Murder. Air date, March 10th, 1985. How I arrived at this number. Episode number is this. When the show was syndicated, they syndicated the pilot movie, The Death of Sherlock Holmes, into 2 separate episodes. They also do this on Peacock, the NBC app where you can stream the show for free with commercials. You go by the air date, and the first episode of Season 1 was Deadly Lady. So, going by that number and going to this is episode 17 and episode 18 overall of my podcast. Just a friendly reminder, when I talk about the episode, I spoil every aspect of it, every plot point, even the murderer down to his or her motivation. So, if you have not seen this episode, and you're following along on Peacock, it'll probably be episode 18 listed on there. And if you've seen this episode and you haven't seen it in a while, and you own the DVDs like I do, then please get out your Season 1 DVD and insert disc 5 into your DVD player, and this episode is featured on that disc. And now, without further ado, let's dive into the episode. Spoiler alert throughout the rest of the episode. So, we find ourselves in New York again. We have various stock footage because it is not filmed in New York. It was filmed on the Universal backlot, which is why I think that NBC is allowed to show it on their streaming service, even though the show originally aired on CBS. The most of it was filmed on the Universal backlot, making it a Universal television property that NBC owns, because Universal owns NBC, I think. So we have various stock footage, and we find ourselves at the Lexington Cafe with a man who seems to be writing something. But he seems depressed, and he slowly begins taking a gun out of his pocket. We think he's going to shoot himself, but it's actually a cigarette lighter. Mrs. Fletcher then appears behind him and says, "Horace, cigarettes are going to be the death of you." We then find ourselves introduced to Horus Lynchfield, who is a friend of Mrs. Fletcher's from Cabot Cove. He apparently moved to New York to be a poet, and broke some hearts along the way. It's established that they are in New York for an award ceremony for writers. And both of them are nominated in mystery and poetry. So they established that in that first scene, and then we get introduced to Hemsley Post, a prominent writer who used to be a very big best-selling novelist, but has not shelled out any books in a long time. He is visited by Tiffany Harold, who is on the committee for the awards and is stopping by to make sure that he will be at the party and to talk to him about his unpublished manuscript about Vietnam, which is apparently in the paper. He starts to try to seduce her, trying to get her to come up to his hotel room later on that day. She says that she'll think about it, and there's a knock at the door, and it's Alexis Post, Mr. Post's wife, who is coming to ask him about his unpublished manuscript and whether or not he will pay back all the money that she has given him over the years, since he's not published a novel in a long time. We then find ourselves looking through the window of an apartment. Oh wait, he then tries to seduce his wife into bed with him, but she says no thank you, I'd rather remember things as they were, and she leaves. We then find ourselves looking into a window, and for some reason, for the first 15 minutes of this episode, there's a lot of shots where we're looking in windows where rain is falling. I don't know why, but we look into this guy's apartment window. We don't know who he is just yet. He is sitting at his dining room table, and he's looking at the newspaper, and Mr. Post's picture is on it about his unpublished Vietnam novel. The man gets angry and leaves his apartment. We then get introduced to Mr. Adrian Winslow, a prominent writer who's very prim and proper, and if I'm not mistaken, he seems like he's gay. But I'm not sure. He is talking to a reporter about his latest novel when a woman comes up to him and asks for his autograph. He gives it to her, and then she asks him to read her short story, but he waves her off and tells her that he does not read unsolicited manuscripts. He goes into the party. Meanwhile, Mr. Post is in the bathroom when we get introduced to Frank Lipowski. He's mad at Mr. Post for some reason, and we don't know exactly why. He tries to attack Mr. Post, but a security guard comes in and stops him before anything bad can happen. But Mr. Post lets him go. Meanwhile, back in the lobby, Jessica and Horus are arriving, talking about various awards and things, when that same woman comes up to Mrs. Fletcher that got Mr. Winslow's autograph. This is Debbie, and she's wrote a short story that she wants a writer like Miss Fletcher to look at to see if it's any good. And Mrs. Fletcher agrees to read it, because she's so nice. Meanwhile, they go to the party, and it's in full swing. We get introduced to Tiffany again, who says that she is not a writer, but she is a publisher. She works for a publishing firm, I guess. And she ends up talking to someone else when she finds that Horus is in poetry. I guess she doesn't find that interesting at all. Horus then starts talking to Lucinda Lark, who wrote a book called Woman Unleashed. Apparently it was a very graphic and prominent novel. Mr. Winslow did not find it to be stimulating, as he says. And the action of the party is interrupted when Mr. Winslow demands to know what Mr. Post has written. He knows that it's about Vietnam, but he wasn't there long enough to basically write a book. And he hears that it's so bad that he has not even allowed his publisher to read it, which makes no sense to everyone listening. Meanwhile, Mr. Post decides not to tell anyone what it is and keeps the mystery surrounding it. Horus is talking to Lucinda Lark and saying poetry, and Mr. Post decides to try to hit on her, but she's not interested in him. Horus basically says that he did not find Mr. Post's last novel to be all that great. He found it boring, and Mr. Post ends up hitting him in the face, punching him in the face. Horus then gets his lighter out that looks like a gun, and everyone thinks he's about to shoot Mr. Post, but it's a lighter, of course. A cigarette lighter. And, Mr. Post is like, I ought to knock your block up off for doing that. And then the party's over. The next day, Mrs. Fletcher realizes she has accidentally grabbed Mr. Post's umbrella, and she goes to his hotel room to return it to him. The door is open, but it's not by Mr. Post, it's by a mysterious man who says, what can I do for you? She says, I think that I accidentally at the party last night grabbed Mr. Post's umbrella. It has his initials on it, and I was wondering if he could have had mine. The man lets her in and says, well, let's see if he does. When she walks into the room, Mr. Post has been stabbed to death with a sword that was hidden inside an umbrella. That it was Horus's umbrella. So he asks her, he says, is this your umbrella? And she goes, no, it's not. Oh my, that poor man. So she begins examining. The man who answered the door is Lieutenant Ada Mel Cumberstock. He is trying to get elected for mayor or something, and seems more focused on the press aspect of the case than actually trying to solve the case. Mrs. Fletcher is going around the room, and guys, we have an early appearance by our future sheriff of Cabot Cove, Sheriff Minsker, played by Ron Musk. In this episode, he plays Lieutenant Minor. And, of course, we know that he will become Sheriff of Cabot Cove later on in the show. I don't remember exactly what season. But, he doesn't get much to do in this episode. But it's nice to see an early appearance by him, nonetheless. Mrs. Fletcher begins examining the crime scene and basically telling the lieutenant all that she's found. She finds a letter from Frank Lipowski threatening Mr. Post about a story or something, and she's like, you need to investigate that. And then she finds Mr. Post's glasses in bed, and she says, well, if he was reading in bed, what was he reading? And she puts the glasses down, and the lieutenant, Ada, basically tells her she needs to leave, and that he plans to arrest the murderer that day. A couple hours later, Horus is in the police office of Mr. Cumberstock, who claims that he's the obvious suspect because it was his umbrella that was used to stab Mr. Post. He says, why did you buy the umbrella? And he goes, because it was raining. Anyway, he says, I had no idea there was a sword in it. I got it for like 50 cents. He says, well, the one thing I want to know is, did you kill Mr. Post or did you not? And he says, well, to tell you the honest truth, I don't know. I got drunk last night and I have no idea what I did, so I could have killed him. So the ADA lieutenant says this is an admission and decides to book him. But Lieutenant Minor ends up losing him in the elevator. I'm sorry. There's so many umbrella instances in this episode that I forgot. I'm sorry. Anyway, Lieutenant Minor loses him in the elevator, and he finds himself on a floor with a bunch of people who I think are getting arrested for prostitution, and the judge lets the men go and I guess decides to charge the women, and he gets mixed up in it and he's let go. Meanwhile, Mrs. Fletcher tells Mr. Cumberstock that if he's too dense to figure out the crime to solve the crime, she's going to investigate herself. Back at the hotel in the lobby, she runs into Tiffany again, who tells her she was so sad to hear about Horus being arrested and that she didn't think that he would be capable of something like that. And Mrs. Fletcher says, well, he's not. And she said, Tiffany, I think we found your hotel key in Mr. Post's room. Why was it there? She says, well, I was interested in his unpublished novel, and I told him to meet me in my room. I wasn't comfortable meeting him back in his room, because the man was coming on a little too strong, if you know what I mean. And Tiffany said he never showed, but when he went to her room, or when she went to his room earlier before the cocktail party, his wife had shown up, and she listened outside the door while they talked about money matters. So Mrs. Fletcher decides to go visit Mrs. Post, who I guess is in the fashion industry, because she's putting outfits and such together. Mrs. Fletcher decides to go talk to her, and she says, I'm not prying into your personal business or your life, Mrs. Post, but why is it that you went to your husband and asked for, I forget the amount, but a considerable amount of money? She says, well, me and my husband have been separated for 10 years now because he has not wrote a single novel, and also he's blown out, not just in writing, but in the bedroom too. And I've given him a considerable amount of money over the years to help him because he has not published a novel. And I was hoping with this unpublished manuscript that he has, that is missing, by the way, that I would get some of my money back, but I did not kill him. So she's automatically eliminated as a suspect. Mrs. Fletcher then goes back to the hotel and runs into Horus. Horus says, they let me go. She's like, you're a fugitive now. You have to turn yourself in. We have to go back to Lieutenant Cumberstock before you get in serious and even more trouble than you are now. They go to the police station where Lieutenant Cumberstock is interviewing Lucinda Lark, and they're talking about her book. And Mrs. Fletcher comes in with Horus, and Mrs. Fletcher says, Lieutenant, did you ask Miss Lark about the inscription on the book she gave Mr. Post? And she says, I inscribed the dates wrong. She said, I'm not good with numbers. She said, and besides, why would you suspect me? I hardly knew the guy. She then says, and besides, I have an airtight alibi. I was with had the most romantic and stimulating evening of my life last night. And both Mrs. Fletcher and the lieutenant say, who? And she says, Horus. And Horus is like, oh, really? Wow, okay. But he doesn't remember it. Mrs. Fletcher then looked up Frank Lipowski and decides to track him down in Brooklyn. She finds him unloading boxes on a loading dock, and she says, you seem to be angry at Mr. Post. Why? And he says, lady, you need to stop asking me questions. Leave me alone. I gotta work. A foreman then for the dock shows up and tells Mrs. Fletcher that Frank wrote a book about Vietnam. And Mrs. Fletcher puts two and two together and realizes Frank Lipowski is the one that wrote the book. Mrs. Fletcher gets into a phone booth and calls the detective and tells him this and says that he must look into Frank Lipowski. The cops then knock on Frank's door and say they have a search warrant, and we find that he does have the briefcase with the manuscript in it. He slams the door in their face, runs out the window onto the fire escape into the alley below. A bunch of cops come and stop him. And he gets arrested and he confesses to the murder. The next day, when Mrs. Fletcher and Horace are in a cab driving somewhere, I think the hotel, they're talking about Debbie's short story and how interesting it is about her brother going off to Vietnam. And Horace is like, it's amazing that Frank killed just because Mr. Post took his story. And she says, no, there's something not right about that. And then as they're talking about Debbie, Mrs. Fletcher takes the glasses out to read something, and she realizes that the glasses in her purse are not her glasses. Then she has an epiphany moment and decides to go to a podiatrist, eye doctor. The podiatrist tells her that the glasses she has is for an eye stimulus thing and stigmatism. And she says, well, can you take those lenses out of those glasses and put them in these glasses or something? And he looks at her all strange. She then asks Debbie to come to dinner with her to discuss her short story. She then switches the glasses when she asks Debbie to read something she wrote on top of Debbie's manuscript. She says, yes, the opening is a little flat. Mrs. Fletcher then reveals that Debbie is our killer, and that's in your visual aid when she's talking to Debbie at the table that you see there. She says, Frank Lipowski is your brother, the one that you talk about in the story of him going off to Vietnam. I guess you haven't heard the news. He's been arrested for Mr. Post's murder. He confessed to it. No, he didn't do it. Apparently, Mr. Post heard about me asking people to read my short story. He offered to read it and asked me to come up to his hotel room. But he had something else in mind than reading my story. Before I knew it, he started assaulting me. I picked up the umbrella for defense and had no idea it was a sword until it was too late. I swear, Mrs. Fletcher, it was an accident. I didn't mean to kill him. And Mrs. Fletcher says, well, Debbie, I believe you. You have a really great case for self-defense. Once you tell the police what happened, I'm sure they'll understand. And that's it. Apparently, Mr. Post got... apparently Frank Lipowski went to Mr. Post with his idea for his book, and Mr. Post decided to publish it himself. And it wasn't until he saw in the paper that Mr. Post was talking about his book that he had to get the manuscript back. Debbie had a double entendre where she basically had an opportunity to get the manuscript by going up to Mr. Post's hotel room and having him read her short story. But it turned into something she was not prepared for. Is basically what I got from that. Both Horace and Mrs. Fletcher win awards for their in their respective categories, and Horace ends up scaring the sales girl at the counter by bringing out his cigarette lighter, and she ends up tripping the alarm. And that's the end of the episode. This episode did not have a lot of twists and turns in it. It was simple and to the point, but I liked seeing some of the guest stars. Let's get to them, shall we? Frank Lipowski was played by Vincent Baggetta. And I don't think he's known for much. He died in 2017 at the age of 72. He's known for Charlie's Angels, Hill Street Blues, Redemption Steel, and The Man Who Wasn't There. He was in 72 different things. His last known credit is a TV series called Renegade, NYPD Blue. This will not be his only episode of Murder, She Wrote. He will appear in a couple other ones. He guest starred on Freddy's Nightmares, Magnum P.I. He was in a Perry Mason movie, Hardcastle and McCormick, Riptide, Simon and Simon, T.J. Hooker, Hotel Hill Street Blues, Lou Grant, Charlie's Angels, Barnaby Jones, The Love Boat, The Rockford Files, Mary Hartman, and Kojak. Interesting. He had a really, really great career, he did. Our accidental murderer was played by Tesha Blydsam. I do not know how to pronounce her name. I apologize so much for that. She is still alive. She's known for Mad Men, Divorce, an HBO show, No Strings Attached, and The Whackness. Wow, she's been acting for a long time. She's been in 103 different things, and she's still acting. Her last known credit is that show Divorce I told you about. She has something coming out this year called Worth, and she's in post-production for something called With/End. She was in Mad Men as Mona Sterling, The Good Wife, Homeland, Elementary, Nurse Jackie, Law and Order, Criminal Intent, Without a Trace, Third Watch, LA Doctors, Ally McBeal, Love Boat, The Next Wave, Touched by an Angel, love that show, The Larry Sanders Show. She will appear in another episode of Murder, She Wrote. She also appeared in 30-something, Tales from the Dark Side, love that show too, and Punky Brewster, and Family Ties and Cadmium Lacey. And she also got started on Hill Street Blues. Awesome. I wish I could pronounce your name. I'm so sorry. But you were awesome in this episode. Morgan Brittany played Tiffany Hollow. She is still alive, and she is known for Gypsy, where she played Baby Jane in 1962. Interesting. Gable and Lundberg, the original Dallas, and LBJ, the early years. Her last known credit is 2007's Americanizing Shelley. She's been in 85 different things. She guest starred on Doc with Billy Ray Cyrus, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, Silk Stockings, Melrose Place as Mackenzie Hart. I knew she looked familiar. And she will appear in another episode of Murder, She Wrote. She was also on Dear John, LA Law. She was in Perry Mason movie. She was on the original Dallas, Hotel, Love Boat, Glitter, Dukes of Hazzard, the original, and The Fantastic Seven, and Love American Style, and she was in the original Yours, Mine, and Ours, and on the Andy Griffith Show. Good for her. And Lucinda Lark was played by Constance Forslund. Did not say that right, I know. She is still alive, and she is known for Village of the Damned, the 1995 remake, River's Edge, This Year's Blonde, and The Way We Were. She's been in 41 different things. Her last known credit is 2019's TV series called Baskets. I've never heard of that. She guest starred on ER, Castle, Sliders, 30-something. This is her only episode of Murder, She Wrote. She was on Days of Our Lives, The Love Boat, Magnum P.I., It's a Living, Trapper John M.D., Taxi, One Day at a Time, and she was on the soap opera The Doctors and One Life to Live. Good for her. And then we had Pat Harrington Jr., who played the original Snyder on the original One Day at a Time. He passed away in 2016 at the age of 86. He is, of course, like I said, known for the original One Day at a Time as Snyder, The President's Analysis, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and Move Over, Darling. He was in 164 different things. His last known credit before his death was Hot in Cleveland. Love that show. He did some voiceover work as told by Ginger, Las Vegas, Diagnosis Murder, Fantasy Island, Silk Stockings, this will not be his only episode of Murder, She Wrote. He'll appear in a handful of others, I figured. The Ray Bradbury Theater, that's a good show too. He did some voiceover work in Garfield Christmas Special. Was on The Love Boat, Who's the Boss. So he had quite the career, and he was funny in this one. He was always funny as Snyder. Kenneth Mars played our murder victim, Hemsley Post. He is known for Young Frankenstein. I knew he looked familiar. I love Young Frankenstein. The producers, the original producers, The Little Mermaid, and What's Up, Doc? So he was in a lot of movies, good movies. He died in 2011 at the age of 75. He was in 228 different things. His last known credit was being Grandpa Longneck on the TV series based on The Land Before Time. Oh, he did some voiceover work in Kingdom Hearts too. He guest starred on Hannah Montana, Malcolm in the Middle. He was in a lot of the Land Before Time movies as the Grandpa. He guest starred on Will and Grace, Becker. He did a lot of voiceover work. He was in Police Academy, the series, Party of Five, the original Party of Five, The Pink Panther. He did voice work for that. Diagnosis Murder, Little Mermaid TV series, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Captain Planet and the Planeteers. I loved that when I was growing up. Tom and Jerry, Darkwing Duck, 227. He did some voiceover work in The Smurfs and A Pup Named Scooby-Doo. Awesome. Flintstone Kids, Twilight Zone. This is his only episode of Murder, She Wrote. He was also on Magnum P.I. Awesome career. The guy was fantastic. He had all kinds of voices and a lot of cartoons. He did a lot of cartoons. As his wife was Dana Muffler, or Mulder. Sorry. I'm not going to do Ron Muscat because we know he comes back later. She is known for McCloud, Chosen Survivors, LA Law, and Star Trek, the original series. She is still alive and she's still acting. She's doing a movie in post-production called Finding Hannah. She did some voiceover work in Batman the Animated Series as Dr. Leslie Tompkins. She was in a Perry Mason movie called The Case of the Fatal Fashion, LA Law, Madlock, Star Trek The Next Generation. This is her only episode of Murder, She Wrote. She also guest starred in Heart to Heart, Quincy and Me, The Incredible Hulk, BJ and the Bear, Police Story, Love Boat, The Tony Randall Show, Harvey Boys and Nancy Drew Mysteries, Black Beauty, McCloud, Charlie's Angels. So she had quite an impressive career. And Mr. Winslow was played by Mr. Brady, Mr. Robert Reed himself. Awesome actor. He died in 1992 at the age of 59. He is known for, of course, The Brady Bunch, The Brady Bunch Variety Hour, Rich Man, Poor Man, and Roots. His last known credit is Jake and the Fat Man. This will not be his only episode of Murder, She Wrote. He will appear in a handful of others. Aside from the Brady Bunch, he was on The Love Boat, Hunter, The Law and Harry McGraw, Hotel, Crazy Like a Fox, Fantasy Island, After School Special, Charlie's Angels, Hawaii Five-0, Marmaduke, The Runaways, The Magical World of Disney. Oh, he was in The Boy in the Plastic Bubble. That was a good movie. Rich Man, Poor Man, which was a TV miniseries. He had such a wonderful career. I miss him. And Horus was played by Paul Sand. He is still alive, and he is known for Erie, Indiana, The Hot Rock, Can't Stop the Music, and Teen Wolf 2. He has been in 87 different things, and he's going to be in an upcoming movie called Lauren and Rose. He was in Adam and Steve, a funny movie. Jack Elliott, I don't know what that is. Time of Your Life TV series. Sliders, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, The Secret World of Alex Mack, The X-Files, LA Law, Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman, Night Court, hilarious movie, show, Empty Nest, Quantum Leap, one of my favorite shows, 30-something, The Twilight Zone, Who's the Boss, Give Me a Break, awesome sitcom with Nell Carter, It's a Living, Magnum P.I., Trapper John M.D., this is his only episode of Murder, She Wrote, Cagney and Lacey, St. Elsewhere, The Love Boat, Laverne and Shirley, Taxi. So he's had a wonderful career. And that's it. That's all our guest stars. This was a wonderful episode. I really liked it. It was so nice to see Robert Reed as someone other than Mike Brady. It was awesome to see Pat Harrington as someone other than Snyder. Can't wait to see what other characters they play in Murder, She Wrote. And I can't wait for the next episode because it's one of my all-time favorites, Murder Takes the Bus. I love that one. And I'll tell you why in that one. Happy crime solving, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and I'll see you guys in the next one. And, as always, thank you so much for your support, your comments, and everything in between mean the world to me. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.